Okay, so we all think we know the story of the world's first murder, right? But what if we've been missing the real point all along? You see, the story of Cain and Abel is so much more than just a simple tale of sibling rivalry. It's a text that has been used to explain the origins of violence and even, chillingly, to justify oppression. So today, we're going to really dig in and unpack its hidden meanings. All right, first things first, let's do a quick run through of the actual story from Genesis. It's short, it's brutal, but every little detail here is absolutely crucial. So you've got two brothers, right? Cain, he's a farmer, tilling the ground. Abel is a shepherd. They both bring an offering to God, but here's the first big turn. Only Abel's is accepted. God actually warns Cain, tells him to get a handle on his anger, but Cain doesn't listen. He kills his brother and then tries to lie about it. As a result, he's cursed and exiled. But here's a twist you might not remember. God puts a mark on him, not to punish him further, but to protect him from anyone seeking revenge. And that right there, that's the massive question hanging over this whole story. Why? Why was Cain's offering rejected? The text never actually tells us. And that silence, it has fueled thousands of years of debate. Was it as simple as God preferring a shepherd over a farmer? Or is there something much, much deeper going on here? Okay, let's look at this through our first lens, a theological one. The idea here is that it wasn't about what they offered, it was about the intent behind it. The answer isn't in the gift, it's in the giver. Okay, now look closely at the language here, because the difference is subtle, but it is so important. Cain brings fruit of the ground. Kind of generic, right? But Abel, he brings the firstlings of his flock and their fat portions. The text goes out of its way to tell us he brought the absolute best, the prime cuts, the most valuable part of what he had. And that distinction, it's everything. The argument goes that Abel's gift was a real act of faith. I mean, he gave something that was truly costly to him. Cain's offering, on the other hand, it just feels like a routine, an obligation. Like he was just checking a box, just going through the motions. And this is why that little word "and" is so powerful. The text says God had regard for Abel and his offering. See that? It directly links the person to the gift. The offering wasn't just some thing. It was a visible representation of what was in the giver's heart. So you see, God's rejection wasn't random or arbitrary. It was a mirror reflecting what was already in Cain's heart. And Cain's reaction? Well, that's the ultimate proof, isn't it? Instead of looking inward, asking, "What did I do wrong?" his response is just pure rage, pure jealousy. And that reaction lays bare the very attitude that made his offering unacceptable in the first place. All right, let's switch gears. We're going to move to our next lens and look at how this ancient family feud is actually a blueprint for a really dangerous pattern in human behavior. This isn't just about theology anymore. We're getting into anthropology. Okay, so the key idea here is something called mimesis. It sounds complicated, but it's basically a fancy word for imitative desire. The philosopher René Girard came up with this theory, and his big idea was that most of the time, we don't even know why we want what we want. We just want things because we see other people wanting them. And that imitation, that's the engine that drives rivalry. Think about it. When two people want the exact same thing, a thing that only one of them can have, they stop being just two separate people. They become rivals. They become mirrors of each other's desire. And, well, that kind of dynamic almost always ends in conflict. So Girard saw this as a predictable and really destructive cycle. Step 1. You and someone else want the same prize. In this case, God's favor. Step 2. That shared desire turns you into rivals. And as you become rivals, you actually start to become more and more alike. Step 3. The rivalry just keeps escalating until, eventually, violence, getting rid of the other guy, starts to feel like the only way out. And if you look at it that way, Cain and Abel are the absolute tragic archetype. It's perfect. They both want the same thing, God's approval. The moment Abel gets it, Cain can no longer see him as a brother. He only sees a rival, someone who has what he wants. And in his mind, the only way to resolve that impossible tension is to eliminate the rival. Suddenly, this isn't just an old story. It's a foundational myth about where human violence actually comes from, all driven by imitation and rivalry. Okay, now we're going to zoom out to our widest and honestly our darkest lens. We're going to look at this story's devastating legacy throughout history. This is where you see how an interpretation of a story can be twisted and weaponized with truly horrific consequences. First, let's be absolutely crystal clear about what the original text says. The mark of Cain was not a curse, it was an act of divine mercy. God puts this mark on Cain to protect him, so that no one would kill him out of revenge. It was meant to be a shield, not a stain, a sign of protection. But over the centuries, that meaning, that story of protection, got horrifically twisted and turned completely upside down. It actually started with a different story from Genesis, the curse of Ham. Around the 8th century, some scholars started linking that curse to having black skin. Later, in Europe, that logic got picked up by Christians and merged with the story of Cain. Suddenly, the mark of Cain was reinterpreted as being black skin, a punishment. And then, that devastating idea crossed the Atlantic. And this quote right here, even though it's talking about Ham, Noah's son, not Cain, it shows you the seed of the idea. It explicitly says a divine curse changed someone's color, and that his descendants are the blacks. This created the theological framework, the justification for seeing blackness itself as a kind of divine punishment. And this wasn't just some abstract theological debate happening in a library somewhere. No, this reinterpretation had devastating real-world power. It was used to provide a convenient moral and even religious justification for the incredibly brutal economic system of racialized slavery. It framed blackness itself as a sign of being inherently inferior, divinely cursed, and therefore ordained for servitude. So after all of that, what are we supposed to take away from this? The story of Cain and Abel, it's clearly not just one simple story. It's more like a vessel holding multiple, powerful, and sometimes totally contradictory ideas that have really shaped our world. So on one hand, you have a theological warning. It's a timeless lesson that what's going on in our hearts, our true motives, that matters way more than just our outward actions. It's a warning that just going through the motions is empty if your heart isn't in it. Then you have this human blueprint. It's this really disturbing archetype for how rivalry and imitation can just spiral out of control into violence. It shows how wanting what someone else has can fester and turn into wanting them gone entirely. And then, finally, it's a historical weapon. It's this incredibly sobering example of how sacred texts can be misinterpreted, twisted, and weaponized to justify centuries of oppression. How a story that was originally about mercy can be turned into a tool of hate. What this all shows us is that understanding how a story gets told and retold over time can be just as important as the original story itself. And it leaves you with a pretty big question, doesn't it? How many other stories that shape our world have these hidden meanings, these long, dark shadows, that we've just never even stopped to question?